President Donald Trump is making good on expanding mining and mineral extraction on federal lands by issuing an executive order called Unleashing American Energy. It says undue burdens on mining operations should be rescinded immediately, and that would likely include former President Joe Biden's 20-year moratorium on new mining and mineral leases in the Superior National Forest. The order is popular in wide areas of northern Minnesota. President Trump won the 8th congressional district by 14 percentage points, and he won the 7th congressional district by 37 percentage points. Expansion of mining would mean new jobs. The Twin Cities Metal Company alone estimates its proposed facility would create 700 new jobs over the next 25 years. But the opposition to the expansion of mining in this area is fierce, and leading the way for years has been the citizens' environmental group Friends of the Boundary Waters. And Chris Knopf is the head of that organization and joins us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, your thoughts on these executive orders that are partially come, and there expect to be more of them, that basically would give a green light to mining, not just in northern Minnesota, but really across the country in some of these sensitive areas?
Sure. What President Trump is doing with his sort of mantra, drill, baby, drill, is say that we don't care about the land, air, and for Minnesota, the water that would be polluted by these mines. And so specifically what we're looking at, there are two things that the Biden administration did to protect the boundary waters area here in Minnesota. One was that 20-year moratorium that you talked about, where on federal lands adjacent to the boundary waters, that there is no mining for the next 20 years.
Right.
And so the idea there is that, pollution nearby would kind of go into the wilderness. It's sort of like if you have a no smoking zone.
But environmentalists certainly were celebrating President Biden's order, that 20-year moratorium.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it looks like President Trump is reversing that. Let me ask you something. I mentioned President Trump and his policies are extremely popular in northern Minnesota, where the boundary waters are located. How do you respond to that? Because he's become more and more popular. This sort of pro-mining issue has become more and more popular over the years. With the people there, how do you respond to that?
Sure, I would say two things, that President Trump did not win Minnesota. And so for statewide, that the policies for protecting the boundary waters have widespread statewide support. Yeah. And then with respect to the success of President Trump in Northeast Minnesota, really what we're looking at is a cultural battle between rural America and urban America, between greater Minnesota and the metro area. And I think that success in the future for our organization and for organizations that want to move Minnesota forward is to try to find those bridges between greater Minnesota and the Twin Cities.
All right. Well, the environmental groups, and I've talked to a number of people, the mining groups, I've talked to a number of them in recent days, they all insist that this kind of mineral extraction these days with technology can be done in a way that would not jeopardize the precious waters of the boundary waters, or jeopardize that wonderful environment that we so treasure up there. How do you respond to that?
Sure, that simply is just not true. I carry, as a reminder, a Pokemon card in my wallet here that my grandson has. And, my grandson thinks the Pokemon world is real, but that's not the case. And for this type of mining, it's different than traditional taconite mining. For this type of mining, this copper sulfide mining, the sulfide in the ore when water hits it, you create sulfuric acid. And that's how it's different than traditional taconite mining. And throughout the country, throughout the world, this type of mining has a perfect track record of pollution. And with that perfect track record of pollution, we know in a water-rich environment that we will have pollution in the boundary waters. Right. And so the question becomes, is it worth it to pollute the boundary waters for this mining? And then we can have an honest discussion about the pros and cons of that, but it will pollute.
I know that you and other environmental groups are already gearing up with the lawsuits to try and fight this in court. Are you concerned that the judiciary nationally in the federal courts has become more sort of in the pro-Trump style, simply because he's been able to make more and more appointments, and he certainly will make more appointments over the last 4 years? Does that worry you?
For sure. We still have confidence in our judicial system, and we are a nation with 3 branches of government, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. And so we have been in federal court. We expect we will be in federal court again. Twin Metals lost in federal court, and we were just in Washington, D.C. in court, in the Federal Court of Appeals, where Twin Metals was appealing its loss. And so we were successful there. And if the courts adhere to the law, we expect to be successful in the future.
All right. Let me go back to this cultural war and the popularity of President Trump in that area. Absolutely, you are right, of course, that Kamala Harris won Minnesota. But the support for Donald Trump and his pro-mining policies is overwhelming in northern Minnesota. And a lot of it has to do with jobs. Twin Metals says that they alone would have 700 new high-paying jobs over the 25 years. Don't we owe something as a state to those people who live in that area?
Sure. I think there's a few things. I think that President Trump is tapping into an understandable concern where people feel they're not being heard. They think that government leaders are not listening to them. They think that other institutions are not listening to them and have not helped the middle class over the last 40 years. And people that have those attitudes, they're right about that. They're right that the middle class has been at a standstill for really since the early 1980s.
And especially in northern Minnesota.
Sure. And the interesting challenge with northern Minnesota right now, in the 3 counties in the Arrowhead, Lake, Cook, and St. Louis counties, the unemployment rate is between 3% and 4%. So really, there's not an unemployment issue there. Instead, there's 2 things. There's a worker shortage up there right now. So if you go to the sort of small businesses up there, they're really hurting to get workers there. And then the second thing is to have living wages there, have wages that really allow a family to survive.
That's the issue you hear when you talk to people from there.
For sure. It's tough to find a place to live, to afford to live, and to have wages that sustain a family, to have a good, solid middle-class life. And those are both legitimate issues.
It sounds like in the end, despite obviously the overwhelming pressure from the Trump administration, sounds like you think you can prevail here.
Well, I think there's absolutely. I think that both legally we have a winning hand. I think that legislatively, ultimately, we'll have a winning hand. I think the real success for us will be making it a win for everyone, and that making it a win for the people in northeastern Minnesota, for the people here in the metro area, is making a vision where the communities that are gateways to the Boundary Waters, Ely, Grand Marais, the North Shore, that they thrive and they prosper. And it's important for us to recognize that those communities, in order for the Boundary Waters to be protected, those communities must thrive, and we must have shared prosperity in our state. But
you want them to thrive without mining? Without an increase in mining.
Well, without polluting our water. In this type of mining, in this location, will pollute our water. And so what we need to do is look at ways in which we can support the real drivers of economic advancement in this state and across the country, small businesses, and really support those, and working with our community colleges to supply the workers for those small businesses. And it's those sort of cooperative efforts between the public sector and private sector that'll really lift all boats in northeastern Minnesota and across the state.
You mentioned in this area, mining interests say they can do this cleanly, but is your concern, especially the sensitivity and the nature of this area, complicates it?
Absolutely. We have a proposed legislation here in Minnesota called Prove It First. And Prove It First is very simple. It simply requires Antofagasta, the Chilean company that wants to operate here, Glencore, the Swiss company that wants to operate a sulfide mine here, that they have to show where there's been one example where this type of mining has been done safely in the United States without polluting before it's been done here. And so if past is prologue to the future, if they can't make that burden, if they can't make that showing saying, hey, here's a mine that has operated safely, then we shouldn't operate it here. That we can hold off until there's an example where the pollution hasn't happened before we put the Boundary Waters at risk. Okay, well, Chris Knopf, thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it. We want to let you know several weeks ago we did do an interview on Talking Points with Republican Congressman Pete Stauber, who was vowing again to introduce bills that would expand mining near the Boundary Waters. You can find that interview on our WCCO YouTube page and on our website. Please email me with comments and suggestions. Thanks for watching. Esme Murphy, WCCO News.